Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this lunchtime seminar on discussing the journey of a pro bono lawyer. And the lawyer that we have with us today is Fiona McLeay. We're very, very pleased to welcome her to the faculty. She is currently the CEO of Justice Connect, which is Australia's largest and oldest pro bono clearinghouse. It provides access to justice to disadvantaged people and community organizations through referral to pro bono lawyers and dedicated outreach services to specific client groups. Prior to this, Fiona worked at World Vision Australia, holding various positions including General Counsel. And as she'll share with you, she's got a range of experiences in the pro bono area, working with a variety of types of organizations, including working as a pro bono coordinator and national corporate citizenship manager at a law firm before that. And she's currently also the deputy chair of the Australian Charities and Not-for-Profits Commission and a board member of the Human Rights Law Centre. So we're very, very pleased to have her with us. Please join me in welcoming her to today's talk.
Thank you. Thank you. It's such a delight to be here. I always love talking to students. It's always good energy and enthusiasm for discussing ideas. So I guess at the beginning I wanted to warn you that this will start off with me talking, but I really hope that it can turn into a discussion. I'm really interested to hear your responses to what I've got to say, what you think of my journey, whether that would be something you could perhaps do here in Hong Kong, and what some of the barriers might be to a similar kind of career, and perhaps we can have a little bit of a workshop at the end and work out ways of developing a career path that might take you down the public interest kind of path. So keep in mind those questions. If you want to stop me as I'm going through, if you've got a burning question that you really want to ask, then just put your hand up and that's fine. Otherwise, there'll be plenty of time for questions at the end and some discussion at the end. So let's proceed on that basis. So I'm wondering if any of you have ever been to one of those talks about your career where somebody says you need to have a plan. You need to have a 3-point plan or a 5-point plan or a 10-year plan or a 4-year plan. Has anyone ever had one of those talks, presentations before? No? Hopefully. Okay. Well, this isn't going to be one of those talks either. I've been to a few of those where people say you must have a plan and you must work systematically through what your career is going to be like towards an end point that you have in mind. I think that's good if you can do it, but it's certainly not the way that I approached my law career. So I hope in the course of the next little while you'll get to see that it is possible to have a really satisfying career in public interest that doesn't require you to have a plan at the beginning. I think each role, though, that I've had has built on the previous one. So if there's a plan, I suppose it is just to have one thing that leads to another thing. So let me take you on a bit of a journey. I guess it took me a long time to get to be the CEO of Justice Connect. This is my 20th year of being a lawyer, actually, I realised last week. So I've done a few things. I guess perhaps a little bit unusually, I sort of stumbled into law almost by accident. When I was at high school, I wanted to go to university and I wanted to study ancient Greek history and architecture and literature and philosophy. And that's all I wanted to do. I just wanted to be at university and I wanted to study the Greek classics. Not a very practical plan. And my careers teacher in high school didn't think it was a very practical plan either. And she said, you need to have more than one choice. We had to fill out a form when I was at high school and you had to write the preferences of where you wanted to study. And there were 8 lines on the form. So you had to have 8 different courses you wanted to apply to. So in case you don't get into your first one, then the second and third and so on down the list. So I just had one thing on my form and it said an arts degree at the University of Melbourne, which is one of Australia's oldest universities, and it has lovely old buildings and a lovely campus with big trees and an enormous library that I was very excited about. So I thought it was what a university was and I just wanted to go there and study ancient Greek history. So my careers teacher said, you can't just have one thing, you should put something else. And I said, I don't want to do anything else. She said, well, why don't you put arts and another degree? I said, well, what would I put? She said, well, you can do arts and law. And I went, okay, law, that's about arguing. I like to argue, so maybe I'll put arts and law. So that's what I did. And that's what I got into. So I found myself enrolled in a law course, which was a bit daunting, actually. In my family, everybody comes from the country and they're all farmers or shopkeepers. There aren't any lawyers or accountants or judges or anybody with a university degree. So my mother said, well, maybe you should find out what lawyers do. I decided to take a year off, a gap year between high school and university. And so my mum said, well, maybe you can get a job as a secretary in a law firm. Rather than be a lawyer, you're not a lawyer yet, be a secretary. So it was a bit of a crazy plan, but I actually did that. I learnt to type and I got a job as a very junior secretary in a law firm at 18 years old, having absolutely no idea what happened in a law firm. I knew very little about the law and even less about law firms. I had a great time, actually, in that first job. I worked in the labour law and industrial relations practice of a very large Australian law firm as a junior secretary. And it was a very interesting and very dynamic environment. They were running some big pieces of litigation against unions. And I learned a lot and made a lot of good friends. And then I turned up at the first day of law school, and it was nothing like what happened in the law firm. The first two subjects were, we used to call them Hipple and Tipple. They were history and philosophy of law and torts and the process of law, the two first subjects at Melbourne University. And it was a big lecture theatre with about 300 students and a lecturer a long way down the front. And she was very old and very earnest, and she lectured with her eyes closed. So that was my first experience of studying law. I lasted 1 year in the law course, and then I focused on my arts degree, my classical Greek studies, philosophy, psychology, and criminology. So I got all the way through my arts degree, and I still had done 2 years of law, 1 year of law, and I had to decide what would I do now. I couldn't really get a job as a Greek scholar, not very many jobs as classical Greek scholars, and I sort of felt that the law degree was sort of still sitting there, something that maybe I didn't want it to defeat me. I didn't want to let this subject be something that I couldn't tackle. So in the end, with the encouragement of some of the people I'd worked with in the law firm, actually, I did go back to law. And I went back to law at a different university, and I finished the course. One of the reasons I think that I went back was that I found a university that was more interested in the things that I was interested in. I was very interested in social justice, very interested in fairness and equity, in looking out for people who were getting a raw deal in life, and starting to understand that the law could be a way of doing that. One of the ways that I did that was, as a law student, to volunteer at a community legal centre. Community legal centres in Australia are community-based, quite grassroots organisations that provide free legal advice and training and sometimes representation to poor people and disadvantaged people who can't otherwise get legal help. And they often have volunteer places for law students to help with the intake of the clients and some of the research. So I volunteered at the Community Legal Centre while I was studying, and I found that really helpful to ground me and help me to really understand the way that law worked and the way that it could actually be a useful tool for social justice. I also did the clinical law program at the University of New South Wales. As part of that program, the law school actually ran a community legal centre as part of the law school. So you could do a semester at the legal centre for credit. And it was a very difficult course to get into. There were only 14 places, and you had to apply and explain why it was you wanted to do this kind of work. And it was an amazing experience to work with some very, very clever and passionate lawyers who really, again, showed me that you could help people who were discriminated against and disadvantaged with the law. So when I left university, I thought the Community Legal Centre was the place for me. I had really enjoyed volunteering there. I had enjoyed my time at the University Legal Clinic, and I thought, this is the sort of job that I want to have. I want to do this kind of work. The problem was that it was very difficult to get a job in a community legal centre. They're quite small sometimes, and they certainly were 20 years ago. And there were very few jobs for graduate lawyers. The jobs that did exist in community legal centres were for people that had experience, and I didn't have very much experience. So I also needed to pay my rent. I had some government support to study at law school, but that finishes when you finish your degree, and so I needed to get a job. So I started to look at the other alternatives, and the main other alternative was to work for a private law firm and do commercial and corporate law. So this was a pretty confronting thing for me, I guess. I'd gone through law school very much wanting to be a public interest lawyer and a public service lawyer, and to find that actually it wasn't going to be a straightforward path like I'd hoped, that I was going to have to take a more circuitous route. So I finally decided that maybe some of the larger law firms didn't look so bad. I talked to some of my friends and found out where people worked, and decided there were a couple of firms that maybe would be good to work at, and was recruited to a firm called Phillips Fox, which has now actually become DLA Piper, which is a very large firm. And so they gave me a job as a graduate lawyer, and I was in the graduate intake in 1996. And the first day there, I will still remember I had bought my first ever suit, and I turned up in reception with the other new grads, and everybody was in a black suit or a navy suit, and I was wearing a suit that was the colour of this bottle top. It was a very beautiful suit, but it wasn't black. It wasn't navy, and I felt very out of place. I thought, oh my goodness, the firm has made a terrible mistake. They must have thought they were hiring somebody different, and I think I spent the first 3 months expecting that somebody from the HR department was going to come and tap me on the shoulder and say, we're very sorry, we thought you were someone else, would you mind leaving quietly, not making a fuss? But it didn't happen actually, and I guess it was a really good experience because I discovered that even though the environment was very unfamiliar, it was a really good place to learn. The law firm put a lot of effort and resources into training its new graduates. I was part of a cohort of people. We were all in this together. And the other lawyers that I worked with who were more senior took the juniors under their wing and really, taught us actually how to be a lawyer. So I learnt practical skills. I learnt how to draft letters. I learnt how to turn a research paper into sensible advice that a client can actually do something with. I learnt how to negotiate settlements, that the law is not as simple as, this is the answer and so now you just apply it. I met some people who became really great mentors and who are still very close friends. I learnt about the importance of discipline in the way that you practice as a lawyer, about being able to do research within a time frame, within a budget, and delivering it to a high standard and doing that again and again and again. I learnt to be rigorous, and I learnt to work hard. All of these things were really important lessons that I'm very grateful for, and I draw on those every day. I also discovered at the law firm this thing called pro bono. I knew about community legal centres, but I didn't really know very much about what law firm lawyers could do in terms of public interest and public service work. But at the law firm, I had the opportunity through a legal centre that I was involved in to actually do a pro bono case within the law firm. And it was a very, very tiny part of a test case that the legal centre was running to see whether Aboriginal Australians could get compensation for their treatment by the government in the past. So I went to the law firm partner that I was working for and asked if it would be okay if I could do some of this work pro bono within the firm. And she kind of looked at me and she said, well, that sounds like a pretty important thing to do. Yeah, I guess you can do that. And that was my very first pro bono case that I ever did. I think I really liked that case, and I guess in some ways it really just reinforced to me that the community legal centre was where I wanted to work and not the law firm. And so I kept trying, I guess, to get a job in a community legal centre. I worked in that first law firm for a couple of years, and then I moved cities, and I thought, right, now I've had almost 2 years of training in a big firm. I know how to be a lawyer now. Surely I can get a job in a community legal centre now. But I found that even though I knew a little bit about law, I still didn't know very much about human rights law and about community lawyering. And so the community legal centres still didn't want to hire me. So that was pretty disillusioning, actually. But I also found out that the skills I learnt in the law firm, which were in construction and engineering disputes, were actually very valuable skills that lots of law firms wanted in their firms. And so it was quite easy to get a job as a junior lawyer in another large firm as a construction lawyer. So you can imagine I felt a bit disappointed by this. I didn't really want to be doing that kind of work. I wanted to be doing public interest work, but it was the only job on offer, and again, I still had to pay the rent. So I finally, I held out for about 3 months, and finally I accepted my fate and joined a law firm called Clayton Utz. And it was actually one of the best decisions I've ever made to work at that firm. I was with Clayton Utz for 8 years, and they were enormously satisfying and productive years in my career. And in many ways, they laid the foundation for what I've done since then. Clayton Utz had and still has a really terrific pro bono program and a very strong commitment to pro bono, including requiring that all of its lawyers do pro bono work. Importantly as well, the partner that I worked for in the firm was very committed to social justice as well and supported the lawyers in his team to participate in pro bono. So I was able to take up several pro bono files within my first year of working at the firm, in amongst working on some very large litigation claims against mining companies and so on. And that experience then led me to see an opportunity to help the firm be even better at doing pro bono work. The firm was a national firm. It had offices around Australia. I was in Melbourne, and the person who ran the pro bono program was in Sydney. So I said to him one day, how about I give you a hand in Melbourne and see if we can make the Melbourne pro bono program better? He said, that sounds like a good idea. So I went to the partner that I worked for and said, would you give me 5 hours a week out of my budget to be the pro bono coordinator in Melbourne? And he said, sure. So I found that I had then 2 roles in the firm, one as a construction lawyer and one as the very part-time Melbourne pro bono coordinator. So this was really fun because it meant that I could work with community legal centres and the community lawyers that I was really passionate about supporting and bring the resources of the large law firm to the social justice causes that they were working on. I was able to be an advocate for pro bono within the firm as well as externally, and I got to work with people all across the law firm in all sorts of different departments that I would never have ordinarily worked with. I got to work with people in the business development team and the communications team and the HR team as well as the lawyers in the firm. So it helped me really understand the way that law firms work as well, which is really useful. And best of all, finally, after 4 years of working as a lawyer, I felt like I was actually making a difference. The struggles of individual people were able to be helped by the resources that I had access to and could organise. Several years later, Clayton Utz was one of the firms which partnered with Justice Connect to develop something called the Homeless Persons Legal Clinic, which is a specialist program to help people experiencing homelessness with legal problems. And through that experience, I saw that a large law firm combined with a community legal centre could really have a huge impact on people who were largely forgotten by the legal system. So that was a couple of years doing the pro bono, and then I started to think a little bit more about the nature of the law firm that I was working in and what else it could do to be a positive force in the community, I guess. In particular, about the law firm had changed its structure and was acting more like a business. It had a CEO appointed and a board was appointed and things like that. So it was looking more like a business. And so I started thinking, well, okay, if you're going to behave like a business in the governance and finance side of it, you should also behave like a business in terms of your social responsibilities. So I started to talk to the partners of the firm about corporate social responsibility, and I wrote a paper for them about corporate social responsibility in law firms and what that looks like and how that could be implemented, and recommended to the partners that they establish a corporate social responsibility program at the law firm. So I was very excited about this. I've worked very hard on the research paper, and I spoke to a lot of people, and I designed a very good program, and I sent it off to the senior partners, and I didn't hear anything back. So about every 3 months I would kind of, send an email or run into a partner in the corridor and say, "So have you read my paper yet?" And they'd say, "Oh, no." And I'd sit for a bit and then ask again, and I just had got to the stage where I thought, okay, this is not going to happen. And I came to work one Monday morning and I had an email from the senior partner, and he said, "I read your memo on the weekend. It's very good. I think we should do this. When can you start?" So I then was doing construction law, coordinating the pro bono program, and now establishing a national program in corporate social responsibility in the law firm. So that was also a lot of fun, as you can imagine. I spent a couple of years doing that. We set up a charitable foundation so the law firm could make grants to community organisations that were doing good things. We set up a volunteering program so that everybody in the firm, not just the lawyers, could volunteer in the community. And we continued to work on the pro bono work as well. So by this time I'd been at the firm for quite a while, and I was starting to think maybe it would be good to do something a little bit different. And I saw an opportunity in 2004 to go to the New York University Law School and do a master's in a program called Global Public Service Law. It was a fantastic opportunity. There were 14 of us from all around the world who were interested in the practice of law as a public service profession, so in the service of others, in the service of the public good. So there were public defenders, there were human rights lawyers, there were women's rights lawyers. There was even a lawyer from China who'd been doing pro bono work in her law firm. So I had a great time spending a whole year just thinking about what it meant to practice as a public interest lawyer and how you could do that. And I came back to Australia thinking, okay, what am I going to do now? Which led on to my final, or the second last move, I guess, before this one, which was the opportunity to work as an in-house lawyer. Are any of you familiar with World Vision? It's an aid and development organisation. They're a very large global development organisation, and their Australian office decided that they needed a lawyer to help manage the legal issues that any large company has, really. And so I was employed in that role as the first General Counsel at World Vision. So I went from a law firm where I was working with 200 lawyers to an office of 450 people where there was only one lawyer, and that was me. It was a completely different experience, and in fact much harder work than it had been at the law firm. In the law firm I had a lot more control over what I did, and I had lots more resources to draw on. At World Vision there was so much work, and people were so interested to hear my perspective on things and ask me questions about everything from tax to employment to intellectual property to contract drafting to litigation to industrial relations, sometimes all in a space of an hour. It was very, very interesting and very hard work. I did that for a couple of years, and then I took the opportunity to work in some different parts of World Vision. So I moved out of the General Counsel role and I headed up the advocacy team for a year, and then moved again to head up a marketing part of the marketing and fundraising part of the team. So in some ways it was really a great experience and a great learning for what I did next, which as you've heard was to become the CEO of Justice Connect, which is where I work now. So Justice Connect is really a legal services organisation that provides free legal help to disadvantaged people and to community organisations that work with disadvantaged people. And we do that by accessing the support of law firms. So we have a number of different ways of working. We're a clearinghouse, so we match individual clients with law firms, individual NGOs with law firms for advice. But we also have developed a number of programs that provide direct legal services to different client groups. So I mentioned the homelessness program earlier. That's one of our key programs. We also have a program for older people. which focuses on elder abuse, a program for migrants, and another program which is actually a legal service for community organisations, providing them with legal advice about their governance and regulatory issues. A lot of those programs are outreach based, so we don't expect the clients to come and find us in our office in the city. We actually send lawyers out to homelessness agencies, drug and alcohol services, hospitals, and give the advice to clients there, and if it's needed, match them to the lawyers in the law firms who can do the more comprehensive work for them. We also work very closely with the law firms to help build their commitment to pro bono. So we do a lot of training, we do a lot of awareness raising about pro bono, we help law firms get good policies on pro bono, we encourage them to talk to each other, learn from each other. We design programs in conjunction with the law firms. All of those things are to build pro bono capacity amongst law firms in Australia. And the other thing that we do is advocacy and law reform, usually working with government to identify areas where we see the law is not working, where it's causing disadvantage or perpetuating disadvantage, and we suggest better ways of doing things to government. And we do that using the evidence from all of the work that we do with our clients. So over 15 years of running the homeless law service, we've seen that homeless people are disproportionately affected by laws which govern the way public space is regulated. If you don't have anywhere to live, then the street is your front room. You know, everything you do is public, and so you're disproportionately affected by laws which govern drinking or talking or behaving in public, which wouldn't affect you and I because, you know, we go and do that stuff in our homes or, you know, in a restaurant or somewhere else. So over the years we've done a lot of advocacy with government, helping to explain to them that the way that these laws are drafted and the way that they're policed impact very negatively on homeless clients. We saw that there were systemic issues in the way that the police were issuing fines. Some homeless people were getting thousands of dollars worth of fines for public space offences. Occasionally, the same policeman would be fining the same person every day for weeks because that was where that man happened to live and that's where that policeman happened to work, and so they interacted every day. So we were able to do effective advocacy to change laws, to work with the police, to do training for the police to help them understand that, you know, this person wasn't sitting there on the street with a can of beer to be annoying. It was just that that's actually where he lived. And we've been able to make a difference to the way that some of those laws work. There's still plenty to do, but that part of our work is very satisfying because it means that we're not just responding to the legal issues of the individual people, but we're working to make the system better overall. So that's really, I guess, my journey. I guess the things that I would perhaps leave you with before we have some discussion. I said at the start there's no 3-point plan or 5-year plan, but these are the 3 things that I would encourage you to think about as you look to what your careers might be. The first thing I'd say is that sometimes you can't see where something's heading, but that doesn't mean that you aren't going anywhere. You might not be able to see the destination, but you're almost certainly on your way somewhere. So this is true when you're working in a large law firm and you're working on a big piece of litigation and there's 1 million documents, like literally 1 million documents that have to be discovered, made available to the other side for them to look at. I did a lot of discovery when I was a junior lawyer, sitting in rooms, because I'm old, with paper, folders, reading endless pages of documentation about gas pipelines. It's pretty hard to see what journey you're on when you're sitting there doing that. But it turns out that you are actually, you know, learning things about discipline and about organisation and about teamwork. And you're also learning that this is not something you want to do for the rest of your life. So you may not quite know where you're heading, but you're heading somewhere. The second thing I would say to you is that the people that you work with are as important, in fact, probably more important than the work that you do. You're going to spend a lot of time in your first job, whatever that is, but particularly in a law firm, with a relatively small group of people. I didn't choose construction law necessarily because I had my heart set on that kind of legal work. In fact, I didn't know such a thing existed really until I started in the law firm. I actually ended up in the construction team mainly because I liked the lawyers in that team. They were good fun, they were clever, they worked hard, but they also liked to have fun out of work. They were good mentors, I trusted them, and they respected me. They seemed to understand me, and that turned out to be a good intuition. Without the support of the partner that I worked for and the rest of the team, I would not have been able to do all the different things I did in my career at Clayton Utz. So the people you work with are as important as the work that you do, and probably more important. So keep that in mind when you are starting out in your first job in a law firm, or in a bank, or wherever you end up working. It doesn't really matter what you do, especially at the start, but make sure you do it with good people. And the final thing I would say, as I look back on my career, is be willing to take opportunities as they come up. There's lots of different paths you can go down. There's probably not really a wrong way to go. You're all smart people, you're in law school. You're probably not going to make a mistake in terms of a path. You're much more likely to be successful if you take opportunities as they come up. Don't close yourself off to something because you think you won't like it, or because you're afraid, or maybe because your family would think it's a really terrible idea. You do need to be a little bit brave and be prepared to step out of your comfort zone. And for me, that actually meant, in some ways, going into a law firm. That was stepping out of my comfort zone. But then leaving the law firm is also stepping out of your comfort zone. So you do need to be willing to do that. I think also take opportunities as they come, but also don't be afraid to make your own opportunities as well. You can look around and see, it'd be good if something was happening, if somebody did something there. So you could be that somebody. So you can create your own opportunities as well. So I guess that's really the three things I would leave you with out of my kind of rambling story. Sometimes you can't see where something is heading, but that doesn't mean you're not going anywhere. The people you work with are as important as the work you do, and take opportunities as they come. Don't close yourself off to things, or make your own opportunities. So that was really all I wanted to say in terms of my kind of, prepared remarks, but I'd really love to hear from all of you what you think about that. Do you think that there's anything in my career that might work for you? Could this be possible in Hong Kong? Why not? Maybe what could you all do perhaps together to help each other to have a career that's a bit more out of the ordinary? Yeah, what were your dreams when you started law? What did you want to do? Let's have a discussion.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Fiona, for sharing that journey. We have a good amount of time, and so really this is an important opportunity for you to reflect on some of the questions that Fiona's raised, or reflect on her journey as well. And I'll sort of share with you a little bit about what we at the law school can do to help facilitate your sort of exploration into a different type of career, if this is what you're interested in. But I'll save that for the end. First off, I'd like to invite you to raise any questions, comments, feedback that you might have. Well, you're all sitting here, so clearly you've thought about this. I'm not going to ask you the obvious. Perhaps we can start with the Hong Kong context. What are some of the challenges, or I guess the information deficit? What are the things that you feel you don't know that might inhibit the possibilities for you to take this kind of a career path? Yes? Will there be jobs?
Yes, will there be jobs? Yes, there will be jobs, but they might not be where you think they'll be. I think I often say to people that big law firms are actually very good ways to get trained. Some students come to me and say, you know, I want to have a career in public interest. I want to, you know, have my job basically. What should I do? And I often say to them, you need to actually learn some skills. And I hope what you saw from my journey is that a large law firm or any law firm is actually a good place to start. You will learn good skills. You'll be trained. You'll get a good network of people who will be advocates and allies as you go on through your career. The difficulty I think that I see with people that start off in law firms is that they don't necessarily have an exit strategy. So it's very seductive once you get in there. You know, they'll pay you a lot of money. That's nice. You know, you can buy nice clothes and a nice car, and you can put in a down payment on your apartment and go on overseas holidays, and that all becomes very normal very quickly. We have an expression, we call it the golden handcuffs. Law firms are very clever. They know how to motivate people, and they know that money motivates people, and they know that status motivates people. And so they will keep that in front of you all the time. And once they learn that they can motivate you with money and status, then you will be at a law firm for a very long time. So you need to, I would encourage you to go to a law firm for your training, but I would encourage you to be clever about the way you do that. Don't buy into the lifestyle. Don't spend all of your money on nice shoes and an expensive car. Save and put the money aside, and then in a couple of years' time you will be able to go and get a job in a public interest organisation, in an NGO, start your own small NGO, whatever it is. So I would say, yeah, in answer to the question, yes, there are jobs out there. There's almost certainly a job in a law firm or, you know, in a big bank or whatever that you can start off in. The next job you might have to work a little bit harder to find. So be smart, be intentional about what you do first off, so that you create that space for yourself. In terms of actually getting a job in an NGO, the best thing you can do is volunteer. Find an organisation that you're interested in, whose mission that you support, and offer to help them. Get to know them. We have a lot of people that volunteer with us. We have students, we have people who are mid-career, all sorts of different levels. And if you're willing to, you know, do whatever is needed as a volunteer, you'll sometimes find that positions open up. Funding in NGOs can sometimes be attached to a particular project. So some project funding might come and they might need an administrator. They might need somebody who can help to, you know, run a project. And so you can sometimes get a start by doing an admin role that's not necessarily directly connected to your law, but it's a way of starting off.
Yes.
So I understand that your organization works by getting governments on the law reform and the pro bono capacity operations to get those other organizations to increase their capacity or to listen to your ideas. But how do you get them to be receptive as sort of a separate organization?
So how do we get the government to listen to our ideas? Is that what you mean?
Yeah,
And law firms as well. Yeah, it's a good question. I'll do it in two separate bits. I think in terms of the governments, our approach is really to base everything in the evidence that we have and the stories of our clients. So we don't come to them and say, you know, we're Justice Connect and we think you're doing this thing wrong and you should do it this way. We come to them and say, let me tell you a story about Sally. Sally is a young woman who was experiencing violence from her partner. She had to flee the house with her young children and she ended up homeless. We were able to help Sally get into housing and connect her into support systems. There's 100 people like Sally that we've seen in the last 6 months, and because we've helped all of those Sallys, we've noticed that the law doesn't work in this area. Sally has a debt because she was a co-lessee on the lease with her violent partner and he's not paying the rent and she's now liable for the rent even though she can't live in the house anymore. So we tell the story of the client and highlight the problem in the law through the client's story. So it's not Justice Connect, it's actually the client really that's doing the storytelling. The other thing, I don't know what it's like in Hong Kong, but our experience has been that a lot of people in the bureaucracy, they want to know if their laws are working or not. You know, most of them are not bad people, they're actually good people. They're trying to, you know, make sure that society's working well and harmoniously, and they're very interested if you can tell them actually on the ground this is what's happening. They're often quite receptive. So we don't do it in an antagonistic or aggressive way. We don't very often anyway, you know, go to the press and get articles in the newspaper or things like that. We engage in dialogue and I guess treat them, you know, with respect.
But do you reach them through the public portal? So do you email like the secretary or someone's level, or do you use them through, because I don't know how it works on Australia.
Yeah.
But I would imagine in Hong Kong that we get a lot of feedback, so make sure that they hear stuff.
That you listen. Yeah. That's a little bit where you need a good network, so that's why it's another good reason to work in a law firm, because there'll be people that you know in that network who will know people that can help. Sometimes the local elected representative for a particular area will be interested to hear from you, and they've got an obligation to listen to their constituents that have, you know, elected them. I don't know about Hong Kong, but in Australia, governments have inquiries, and they actually ask NGOs and, you know, people to write submissions and to talk about what they see. That's a really good opportunity to do that sort of work. And sometimes we do actually just send in something, you know, on an email without necessarily having any kind of introduction. It depends a little bit on what we do. But it's a sort of thing, you know, it's a whole other session really about how you do advocacy. But it depends also on the issue, I suppose. Yeah. In terms of the law firms, your question was how do we engage with the law firms to get them to do pro bono work? Yeah. So my organisation was started around 20 years ago as a sort of partnership between some law firms and some community organisations and some legal centres who wanted there to be more pro bono work done by law firms. So we already had a group of lawyers who were supportive of what we were doing. And so we worked with them, and then other law firms saw what the first lot of law firms were doing, and they thought, that looks good. The lawyers that were doing the work were telling other people that they really enjoyed doing the work. So it spread kind of through the network that way. Most of the law firms in Australia now have some kind of understanding of pro bono or some kind of commitment. And certainly in Hong Kong, the international law firms, many of them have pro bono commitment, and also some of the local firms. So there's an awareness of pro bono that you can already, you know, we already tap into that. We say, you know, this is who we are, this is what we can do, this is how we can work with you. These are the pro bono opportunities that we can offer to your lawyers. It's a marketing exercise, I suppose. Yeah.
I just want to ask, because my thought of pro bono was, you know, no union pay.
Yes.
So you've got to union to get paid. And just how does that, you know, interact with the legal aid system?
Yeah, it's a good question.
And then the next question I've got, which is a different area, you know, I've been involved in financial services. So which talked about, you know, you look after people who are disadvantaged. However, you know, people have lots of problems with big banks. So does Justice Connect actually provide a service to help people square up with various mistakes and just breach the common law? Big banks just being, you know, because they've got the power, you know, the legal power, the market power, the dominant power to punch their customer. You know, does Justice Connect do anything in relation to financial services complaints?
Yep. Sure. So the first question is really about what's the role of pro bono in the broad scheme of access to justice. So in Australia we have government-funded legal aid for poor people. and that's provided by lawyers who are employed by the legal aid commissions, as well as by lawyers in private law firms who are paid by the Legal Aid Commission to do the work. That's available mainly for criminal law cases and family law cases. There's almost no government-funded legal aid for civil law matters, including disputes with banks. So there's a big gap already. The other issue is that funding for the government funding for legal aid has been reducing over the last 10 years in particular. And that means that one of the ways that legal aid commissions have managed their shrinking budgets is to limit the number of people that can access it by lowering the amount of money that you have to qualify. So legal aid, when you apply for legal aid, they say, how much money do you earn, what are your assets, and it's getting harder and harder to meet that test. So there's a large group of people that don't qualify for the government-funded service. There's also community legal centres that I mentioned in my story. They're also government-funded as well as getting funded by foundations. They do some of the work that legal aid doesn't do. They do some of the civil law work, but they're quite small and they don't do lots of representation. They do a lot of advice and they do a lot of education, but they don't do a lot of representation. So what pro bono does is try and meet some of that unmet need in those gaps. So it's an absolute article of faith that if a person is eligible for government legal aid or a community legal centre can help them, then they won't get pro bono help. They must go to the service that exists, because we don't want pro bono to undermine government's obligation to be providing legal services to people. It's a really important point, and it's one that pro bono lawyers in Australia, and in fact anywhere there's pro bono and government-funded legal services, you will hear lawyers make that point. The other point you raised was about, what about no win, no fee? Is that something you have in Hong Kong?
It's prohibited.
Okay. So in Australia, you can defer your fee until the case has finished, and if you're successful, you can take the fee from the award of damages. So it's not like the US, which is a contingency fee, which allows an uplift. So you get your fees plus an extra percentage that you negotiate. That's prohibited in Australia. But no win, no fee, where you can actually just get your fees paid from the client's judgment, is allowed. And that's the most common way that people access legal help if they've got a personal injury claim. Workers' compensation, those kinds of cases are almost always done by a no win, no fee firm. So again, pro bono does very little in that space, because the no win, no fee work is done by firms who are very good at it. And they're very good at working out whether or not a person is going to be successful. If you think about their business model, right, it's premised on, are we going to get our fees back? So if a no win, no fee firm says, we're not going to take this person on, it probably means that their case doesn't have any merit. We will sometimes help those clients by getting them advice from the bar, from a barrister, to explain to them why they don't have any merit. But it's very rare for pro bono to do no win, no fee. So you can see there's a spectrum of ways in Australia that disadvantaged people can access legal services, and pro bono is just one component of it. So that's the answer to your first question. Your second question about, do we help people against the banks? The short answer is yes. That falls into the civil law category of work that we would do because nobody else does it. And we certainly have referred people. Usually we would do that by referring them to a pro bono lawyer who would act for them and represent them in court. The difficulty with that kind of work is that some of the firms we work with are very large, and they have the big banks as their clients, and so they have a conflict of interest. If we try and get an individual who wants to sue the bank and the firm already works for a bank, then that's a conflict and they won't take on those matters. One of the challenges of pro bono is overcoming this problem of conflicts. One of the ways we do that is to make sure that we don't just work with big firms, but that we also work with medium-sized law firms and small firms. We work with barristers. We will sometimes work with community legal centres. There are one or two community legal centres that do very good financial work, and so we can sometimes support them in that work. We also sometimes work with financial counsellors as well, so people that have debt issues, they need a lawyer, but they also need a financial counsellor to help them resolve the underlying issue that has led to them having a legal problem. Yep.
Thanks a lot for the introduction to your commitments to your research. I'm interested in the proportion of judicial review cases in your company or other law firms that are engaged in pro bono. And if you have been engaged in judicial review cases, would that have any adverse impact on your relation, on your subsequent relation with the local or the Commonwealth agencies?
Yeah.
How to minimize those kind of...
Yes. Very good question. So yes, we do some judicial review. Most commonly it is with refugees. Australia currently has, well, I think a very shameful refugee policy. We're making it extremely difficult for asylum seekers to even land on Australia to seek asylum. If they do manage to land, we're making it extremely difficult for them to make refugee applications. If they make a successful application, we're making it almost impossible for them to settle in Australia. So, of course, public interest lawyers, like many of my colleagues, we're not very happy about this. And so there's a lot of work that's being done to challenge the laws, and also to the extent that people are actually in the system and decisions are being made about their status as refugees, to make sure that those decisions are being made well. So there's a lot of judicial review happening at the moment in the refugee space, and Justice Connect is working in partnership with a number of refugee agencies to coordinate that work and to facilitate pro bono to help with that. As you suggest, that is delicate in terms of government. So we tend to occupy a kind of what's the word? A bit of a middle space, I suppose. So some of the legal services organisations we work with are much more radical than us, and some of them are no longer funded by the government as a result of that. But they can still work with us. And we don't get government funding for this refugee work. We get government funding for some of our other work, but not the refugee work. So there's not really much they can do. We sort of, I guess it kind of quarantines us a little bit, so we can play a coordinating role, a supporting role, facilitate some of the other work that the other organisations do. So it's a good example, I guess, of the way different sorts of NGOs that work in different ways can partner on the same issue, and different ones of us take different roles. So some take a lead in the advocacy. So the Human Rights Law Centre that was mentioned before, that I'm on the board of, takes a much more upfront role in advocacy, and they don't get any government funding, and they're unlikely to anytime soon. But there's a lot of work we can do to support them in the work that they do that doesn't require us to do the advocacy, because they're doing the advocacy. So it's tricky, but that's the nature of what we do. Yeah.
Other questions? Yes.
I was wondering about your education. So do you feel your interest in arts had any impact on like today? Because I think quite often it seems like people's education no longer matters when they started working for 5 years, and then only what they did the last 2 years really matters who they are, what they're interested in, what their skills are. Also in relation to what you said that I'm an educational scientist, and also in relation to what you said about you started the firm and then you learned a lot of skills, implying that you didn't learn anything. Of course, that's not what you said, but you know, it sounds a little.
It does. I know. It's a very rude thing to say at a university. No, I learned a lot of things at university. In fact, I now have 3 law degrees. Okay, so I started off being a very reluctant law student, and I came around. But yeah, does the arts education help? Yeah, absolutely, I think. I mean, I think it's one of the reasons why I think I was always so interested, not actually interested in the law. That I think, yeah, I'm not very interested in the law, even though I have 3 law degrees. I'm interested in what you can do with it. What's its role in society? What is, how is society constructed? What's the role of law in that? What's the role of a citizen in society? What are our obligations to each other? All of that stuff comes from, from the arts side more so than the law side. There are some good professors, and I'm suspecting that you were probably one of them, who will teach in a way that will encourage students to engage more broadly with the world when they do their studies. But there are plenty of professors who are not like that. And unfortunately, they're often actually in administrative law and constitutional law. The most boring subject I ever did at law school was constitutional and administrative law. It was absolutely deadly. And which is so disappointing to me because I think it was actually John Sexton, who was the Dean of NYU Law, makes a very passionate case that public law, constitutional and administrative law, is the most important thing you can learn at law school if you are interested in social justice and the way that laws work for disadvantaged people. Because ultimately understanding how decisions are made and where they can be challenged is the most important thing you could do. And I wish I knew that when I was an undergrad, and I wish my constitutional law lecturer knew that, because it would have been a much more interesting experience. So, yeah, I think definitely, that kind of humanities base is really important, and I think it's a really sad thing that is, certainly in Australia, that kind of broad education is less and less valued, and there's a lot more pressure on people to sort of, get technical expertise. In terms of coming out of law school and needing to learn again, I mean, that's just the nature of any profession. I think professions have 2 parts to them, right? You have the knowledge that you need to have about the law and the way it works, but there's also a set of skills. So, in the old days, in England, law was a trade. You didn't go to university. I think it was the middle of the 18th century or something, maybe even
60s.
later. You sort of, you were articled to someone, and you followed them around, and you watched them, and you read things, and you didn't actually go to university and study the law until relatively recently. So professions have these 2 sides, and so you're going to spend most of your time at university learning the law, and less on the actual skills, although that's changing. I did my undergrad 20 years ago. It's different now, yeah. So no, I'm not devaluing your law degrees.
Law is a very old study. It would include a lot of moral philosophy.
Yes,
and
yes.
that's gone now.
It has, yeah. It's true. Well, it was one of the original professions which had a whole kind of way of thinking about the world which was embedded in it, which is... Yeah.
We have time for one more question before we wrap up.
So what do you think about... I want you to tell me, do you think this is just crazy talk, this could never happen in Hong Kong, or do you think that there's possibilities? Are you all going to work out thinking, oh, well, I'll have to move to Australia, or...
Maybe I can offer a few insights from the Hong Kong context, and given that these are our students and I know their mindset. So, some 15 to 20 years ago, it probably was one of you. And I'd have to say that your journey through law school really helped me reminisce as well. And in those days, the most frightening thing wasn't that you would show up at a law firm wearing a bright colored suit. For me, it was showing up in a classroom where all my classmates were wearing black suits.
Yes, mine were too.
Luckily, all of you are a lot more casual now, and you don't come dressed to lectures like that. I mean, otherwise you'd show me up, because I never dress in a suit when I do my classes. But I think that what we're talking about in this sort of last leg of questions about sort of the role of university education, it's definitely changed substantially. And it is now focused more on experiential learning. And this is why you can see that your classes are much more oriented and geared towards interactive processes, inquiry-based learning, rather than, a review or descriptive sort of work, getting you to repeat or remember ideas that you come across in the course of your work. That said, I also think that we do need to bear in mind sort of the context within which Hong Kong's legal profession operates, and unfortunately it has impose some constraints on the possibilities for public interest work and litigation in Hong Kong. So for example, if you're a lawyer in an NGO, you're actually not allowed to do direct client services because you're not able to obtain insurance, which would allow you to practice in that way. So direct legal services can only be provided through a law firm, and that's a huge, huge constraint. And I mean, it's a form of, stamping out competition. So the Law Society in Hong Kong is very stringent about it. And even our faculty, when we set up the first clinical legal education program a couple of years ago, we faced a lot of resistance from the Law Society because they saw our students working in our clinic as potential competition. And so we had to negotiate with the Law Society a way to allow our students the experience of learning what it is like to work on real cases, to acquire the relevant skills without doing direct legal services. And so we found a halfway house to make that happen. But I think with that kind of a climate and a culture, it certainly means that the opportunities are not necessarily thrown as far and wide. The second difficulty, of course, is funding of litigation. So we have seen a huge sort of rise in the number of judicial review applications in Hong Kong, and they've also been the subject of a lot of public controversy recently, with some people saying they're being abused to, sort of strong-arm the government and things like that. But we do also have a law against shampati, which basically is an old common law offense which prohibits any non-interested party from funding litigation, the outcome of which they're not, directly interested in. So all of these ways in which, such litigation might be possible, such work might be possible in other countries, they're not exactly open spaces for us in Hong Kong. That said, it's a challenge, but it's also an opportunity. It's up to us to find a creative way to navigate this space and still sort of develop a culture for public interest work. And I think that's where young sort of minds sort of come in. And I think, really echoing what Fiona shared with you, it's so important to be creative and take the initiative and then say, well, if this is the framework, then what can I do within this framework to sort of create a space in which I want to sort of pursue my passion. As we've said, we don't have contingency fees either in Hong Kong, so that's another sort of challenge. I also want to pick up on a few sort of questions that came up and again offer insights from the Hong Kong perspective. You raised a question about how do you engage with government and other bodies about sort of law reform and other proposals. So the Legislative Council, as Fiona quite rightly said, are elected representatives. They have, you can set up meetings with them and they'll listen to you, but also the legislature has a number of panels on education and labor and welfare, and they routinely call for public submissions. So you can actually go and present to LegCo as a member of the public, you can go as a representative of an NGO, and that happens routinely. We also have consultation exercises on various bills that are being proposed. An ongoing one, for example, is whether we should adopt the joint parental responsibility model for childcare in Hong Kong in a post-divorce sort of family. I think it's very important to bear in mind that the career path is no longer linear, and you can do a number of things. But I think this discussion also that we're having about acquiring skills is extremely important. University education, in a way, exposes you to a number of ideas, but also I think today tries to provide you a relevant setting within which to experience some of those ideas in action. And unfortunately, I think we're sort of halfway there, where I think culturally, because of the Hong Kong education system, which is still relatively passive in the public sector, I think as students, you're more inclined to sit back and expect that knowledge is going to be given to you. But as you're hearing us speak, I think you can see that there are things that we can share with you in terms of knowledge, but then there are things that you have to do in order to learn. And that really means sort of entering that space either as a volunteer or accessing opportunities and then picking up the skill set required really to sort of do more with what you have learned in terms of knowledge. And Fiona's sort of shared some insights into the type of work entailed and where you might station yourself to access those opportunities. But as she's also said, it's really about stepping outside the box. And here we have several opportunities. So for example, the Center for Comparative Public Law, we have a lot of projects with a number of NGOs that you might be interested in, working on children's issues or education, domestic violence, political reform, you name it. I think there's somebody in the faculty who's working on that, and there repeatedly calls for student assistance. But again, there's only a handful of people who access those opportunities. We also have a clinical legal education program, as I've said, and one of those is run, of course, by Eric Jung, who has his own law firm, and he sort of takes you under his arm, and it's a very rigorous clinic where you do direct services under the supervision of existing lawyers. We also have the Social Justice Summer Internship, which I run. It's a summer course, but again, it's sort of a clearinghouse for internship opportunities with NGOs so that you can see social justice in practice and really examine whether the law works, how it works, and where it doesn't work, and what can you do to offer solutions in that space. So I'd invite you to apply to or explore these opportunities more concretely if you're serious about understanding the range and scope of work that is out there. And I have to say that in the last 5 years alone, the space for public interest work has really grown exponentially in Hong Kong. It's still a relatively new sort of culture, I would say, at law firms, especially local law firms. But those opportunities are there, and people, even in the law firms, are looking for ideas about how to get people like you interested and involved in this kind of work, because it's great to have as part of your portfolio, right? I mean, you're sort of a do-gooder in the society. You're a law firm, you're well established, but you also have this program that cares about social justice issues. So even if you're slated for training at a law firm, much like Fiona has shared with you, there's nothing stopping you from raising the idea with a partner or your supervisor and sort of explore the space that there might be for you to do that, even though you might be in your corporate seat or in your conveyancing seat, which I have to say is the most boring seat that you're going to be in, especially in Hong Kong. So preparation and intentionality, as Fiona has said, is absolutely key. But you do need to ask more questions and you know, in order to see what the possibilities are in Hong Kong. And I still find our students are somewhat shy about it. But I hope that that will change as you hear more about people's experiences and know that there's no one way to get there. There are many different paths, and everybody you ask will offer you a different insight. So asking questions is really the key, more than what you're going to get in terms of the answers. Any words to wrap up, Fiona?
I would echo that. I think you've got a huge amount of opportunity. You've got lots of energy, lots of education. You've got a lot more power to influence than you think. Get involved in your law society. Law societies are notorious globally for not being very supportive of public interest work. But if you get on committees and councils of the Law Society and start to get involved in that, you'll be able to make these things change. Australia, the danger of hearing my story is you think, oh, it's all amazing and so easy in Australia, and it was always how it is now is always how it was. No, we've worked hard to get these things to be possible. And yeah, 15 years ago, law societies in Australia were not very supportive of this work. It was only through lawyers and young lawyers like you advocating and saying, no, we want to do this work. This is okay. This is, you should be encouraging this law society, not blocking it, that change happens. So if you see a blocker, don't let that be the end of it. Think, okay, well, how could this change? What could I do to make this change? And it might take a few years. That's okay. It's worth it. It'll change. You've got a long career ahead of you. Good luck.
Thank you so much, Fiona. It's really been, I think, inspirational, I hope, for all of you to listen to this. And as you think about it, we're open to receiving any questions that you have. At least, you can certainly direct them to me. And if you want to relay anything to Fiona, I'd be happy to pass it on as well. As I think it'd be a wonderful future for Hong Kong if we could develop more of this practice. And the move really has to come from you guys so that you can build those opportunities. So good luck to all of you. Thank you so much once again, Fiona, for being with us today.
Thanks for coming.
We've really learned a great deal from your experience, and thank you for your candidness. Please join me in thanking Fiona.